Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of June. That's the one. So I'm going to start by talking about my two DNFs this month, and the first one is Palace of Desire. This book, unfortunately, I put down early because I only gave myself about 10 days to read it before I was going to move, and it was reading kind of slow. I wasn't able to find the audiobook for it like I was hoping to, and I was just feeling a lot of pressure to read it before my move because I have a bind up of the trilogy, which is huge, and it's a hardcover edition, and I knew I didn't want to carry it on my person when I moved, and so I felt like I only had 10 days to read it, and that just wasn't happening, and once I realized that wasn't happening, I just told myself to put it down. I'll come back to it hopefully this year. The second soft DNF was another surprise to me, and that one was Drood by Dan Simmons. I have had a book project going on with this book, and I have been looking forward to reading it for a couple of years now. And so I thought for sure it was now finally going to happen. I read The Mystery of Edwin Drood first, and that was the last book I felt like I needed to read before starting it. But then shortly into the book, I ended up realizing that two other Charles Dickens novels were going to be spoiled if I didn't read those first. And those books were Our Mutual Friend and Bleak House. And so, like any good book reader, I figured this out before I moved. So I did pack Our Mutual Friend with us. Because that was the one that kept coming up over and over and over again. However, about 200 pages into Drood, I started to notice that he kept mentioning Bleak House. And then suddenly in the book, it started mentioning characters in Bleak House. And I was like, oh no, here's another one I need to read. So I did not pack that one with me. However, I did have, like I mentioned, a few books that I need to return to my used bookstore. And so after my house was all packed up, I went and I returned to those couple of books to used bookstore and got some store credit. And yeah, I used it to buy an edition of Bleak House. So I now have both Bleak House and Our Mutual Friend on me, and you best believe I'm going to try and knock these out this summer so I can get back to Drood before I forget what happened at the beginning and then have to start the whole book all over again. So that's it for my soft DNFs, so I'll go ahead and start talking about my 3-star reads. I had two 3-star reads, and one of them is What You Are Looking For Is Not in the Library. This book was a nice, cozy Japanese fiction, like I was hoping it would be, and it's about a community library where different people in the community go and look for different books that they think might help them, just to turn out that the recommendation from the librarian is a recommendation that might help them even more. So I was really looking forward to this story. It had a couple of cute surprises, like I didn't realize it was going to be connected short stories, and while the idea of the story was really cute, there were a few things in the story that made me a bit uncomfortable, like the fat shaming of the librarian herself. And it also had a few moments that just weren't as well written as I was hoping for. So this book ended up getting a 3 stars from me. I don't know if I would say that I would recommend this book. I can think of other books like Before the Coffee Gets Cold, just the first one in the series, that I think are just as cozy and better written and a better story overall. My other 3-star read this month was Jamaica In. Again, this was another book that I was somewhat surprised ended up ranking so low. This is by Daphne DuMaurier. I have read Rebecca and have been trying to get around to reading more of Daphne DuMaurier. So I was excited to jump into Jamaica In, and it started rather interestingly, but I could tell just from the writing at the very beginning of the book that it wasn't going to rank as high as Rebecca for me. And I have to say the disappointments just continued as I went on. It was okay. It was nothing to write home about. It's definitely not where I would suggest starting with Daphne du Maurier. I think the character as well as the narrative voice were both weaker than a Rebecca, and the book was nowhere near as atmospheric. I don't think I mentioned in my wrap up, but the end of the book, what was that? Like that I just have so many frustrations with the end of the book. I don't want to go into it because I feel like it would spoil a lot of things, but I was not a fan of the end of that book. I had 3 4-star reads this month, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Logan's Run. This was a science fiction novel about the titular character Logan, and it takes place in sort of a dystopian or speculative version of the US, where the entire world has gone to war, and what that has left is a whole bunch of young people, because the solution to all of the world's crises is that people should never get old enough, because I guess somehow that's going to keep them from fighting one another. I don't know that that part was ever totally clear to me. But anyway, no one is allowed to become older than 21. And what happens is when you hit your 21st birthday, your palm has a flower embedded in it. And that flower goes from red to red blinking black. And when it turns black completely on your 21st birthday, you are supposed to turn yourself in so that you can be put in deep sleep, i.e., killed. And Logan has spent his life as a Sandman chasing around people who don't want to go to sleep and basically forcing them to sleep. And it's a really fascinating, well-paced, very fast-paced story that ends up with a pursuit sequence as Logan tries to decide whether he wants to hunt down one of his last victims or if he is trying to run to escape sleep himself. This book had a lot of interesting twists and turns. I thought it was a really unique idea and kept me, fairly breathless the entire time. I think the one thing that kind of kept it from being a five-star read for me was there were a couple of moments in the story that just didn't make sense. And that was due to what seemed like moments of very poor writing and editing. And so that was definitely a flaw. And it happened repeatedly. It wasn't just once or twice. It was like there were a few times. And so that was a bit distracting because it took away from the pace of the story. And then it also had like gratuitous nakedness in the book, which was just weird at times. So that kept it from probably ranking a bit higher for me because it just sort of brought the enjoyment down as you got distracted by the fact that there were just times where no one was wearing clothes. Another four-star read for me this month was Moll Flanders, which is a 18th century criminal biography and tells the story of Moll Flanders as she goes from being a maidservant in the family that sort of raises and takes care of her, and as she just tries to make it through life in the 1800s as a sometimes single woman, but basically explores how difficult it can be for women at that time to be single or stay single and live in any manner independently. And she is willing to do whatever she has to do to survive and to make it, especially in the way that she sees fit. There are a lot of questionable things that happen in Moll Flanders, but she is a very interesting character and an extremely strong narrative voice that has you guessing the entire time whether or not you're being lied to. So if you like that kind of thing, I would definitely recommend checking out Moll Flanders. My other four-star read for this month is on a totally different vein. This was a nonfiction, Hidden Valley Road. This tells the story of the Galvin family and their 12 children, six of whom end up all being diagnosed with schizophrenia. And in addition to going over the story of this family, the history of schizophrenia amongst their six boys, it also tells the history of schizophrenia itself within psychology and psychiatry, as well as medicine in general. And it's just such an interesting insight into the world of psychology and psychiatry, and just how one mental illness can go from being seen as a horrible disease all the way to the point where it might be seen as just a symptom of other underlying functions of the body that aren't working, or potentially neurodiversity. So if you are interested in exploring families and mental illness and psychology and psychiatry and the history of all of the above, you might enjoy this book. I would compare it as being somewhat similar to Tara Westover's Educated, but there's definitely a lot of distinct differences in terms of it is being narrated by someone outside the family, and it also has definitely a stronger medical and psychological bent to it than Tara's story did, which definitely was more on the lines of a memoir. I had two five-star reads this month, and one of them was The Mystery of Edwin Drood. So this was part of my Drood project, and I was very happy and excited to get to it. It was a very quick read, partially because it's not finished, so that always helps. But I was very pleasantly surprised at how just unique and interesting a storyline it was, how fascinating the storytelling of it was. A very different read for me by Charles Dickens, in just that his approach and writing style. I can definitely see the difference in this between, say, like Oliver Twist or any of his earlier books. And the story is just creepy and yet intriguing all at the same time. And you feel by the end that it's fairly well concluded, given that you're only being given half the story. So I was really excited to get to this one, and I was extremely impressed by the material that is available for us to read today. I just really wish the book had been finished because I really want to know who actually did it and not just have to guess. My other five-star read was part of a Barnacle Buddy read along, and you can still go back and watch that read along sprint if you want to. And that was For Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This is a reread for me. This is one of the books that I've most read in my life, and I was very happy to get a chance to reread it again with friends. I had an excellent time rereading this book. I really took my time with it, and I annotated the crap out of that thing. And yeah, this was just a really interesting revisit for me. I haven't read this book in well over probably 20 years. And so it was really fascinating to just go back and be able to look at it with basically fresh eyes and read the story all over again. While probably two of the biggest surprises or twists in the books didn't surprise me this time because I knew they were coming and I vaguely recalled what they were, I still was very moved by the story. Things Fall Apart tells the story of Okonkwo and his traditional Ibu village on the verge of Nigeria's colonization. And this story is just all about tradition and change and what we make of that, and really tells the story of colonization from the perspective of Africans as opposed to the perspective of the colonizers. And I was able to watch a video where Chinua Achebe shared how it was a book that he felt like at the time it was published was missing from bookshelves. And I would agree with him. And I think this is an excellent book to have on your shelf. And finally, that gets me to the two books that I am currently reading. The first book that I am working on is And Ladies of the Club. This is a historical fiction that follows a women's club that starts up in 1868 in Waynesboro, Ohio. And as far as I can tell so far, this club is being started by these ladies because they are in a very interesting time period in American history. It's post-Civil War, in the middle of Reconstruction, but a lot of the Reconstruction is not happening around them because they're in Ohio. This is before the women's suffragist movement, before the civil rights movement, but all of those things are being talked about. So in this little town, while there is your general gossip about marriage and things, there are also people trying to make sense of the Civil War that just happened, trying to figure out what direction the country should go in, what should happen with all the people who have been freed, whether they should be allowed to vote, what is the women's sort of position in the world. That is a prominent idea for these ladies who are being educated, are in theory allowed to go to college, but most are going to finishing school and have studied Greek and Latin and other things, but find that when they get out of school, all that there is for them to do is domestic chores. And so, what do you do when you have knowledge and no one to share it with? That is a major theme that is discussed in this book amongst all the other themes, and I'm really looking forward to continue reading this very long book. It's really long, guys. It's like 1,400 pages, and it's a mass market paperback, but it's still pretty small print in there. So we'll see how long this takes me, but yeah, it's just occurring to me that I'm reading this really long book and that my second currently reading is also a really long book. I may need to adjust things. So that gets me to The Mysteries of Paris. This is my buddy read with Stormy from at Storm Reads, and we have been reading this book for a while. The month of June, reread book 4, and I did say that instead of talking about it weekly, I was just going to talk about it in my wrap up. So very quickly, book 4 has been really fascinating. We have spent part of the book talking about a poor family and just basically watching their lives get devastated, all at the hands of this one solicitor in Paris. And then the remainder of book 4 then goes through pretty much every main character in the book, and there are a lot of them, one by one paying a visit to the solicitor, where we uncover all the mysterious ways he is blackmailing and involved in their lives. It is a tangled web for sure, and it's getting really interesting. So Stormy and I are both looking forward to moving on to book 5 because there's some characters that have dropped out of the book for now that we were left on cliffhangers with, and we both really want to know what's going on with them. So I'm hoping that comes back up in book 5, and I will be talking about that at the end of July. So, as a recap for this month, you can see that I read 7 books this month for a total of around 1,959 pages, something like that, and way lower than my normal 3,000 pages. But if I take into consideration that I did read about 100 pages of House of Desire before I softy DNF'd that, I had read 200 pages of Drood before I softy DNF'd that one. I've read about 200 pages of And Ladies of the Club. I also moved, and then I also got sick, and there was one point where I didn't read for 5 days. So all that taken together surely has got to equal about 3,000 pages or so. We'll just say it is. So anyway, I didn't meet my normal 3,000 page a month goal, but that's totally okay. That's just something that helps keep me going. And I know where the days and the times went. And sometimes you just don't have time to read or you just don't feel like reading. I will admit I've probably been spending way too much time watching Brad Mondo. If you don't know, go check it out. As far as the update for my big summer reading challenge, on paper, it's not looking so hot. I somehow, of those 7 books, none of them were over 400 pages long. A lot of them were like 330, 350, so awfully close, but none of them got over 400 pages. The 3 books that I put on my TBR for that, I've soft DNF'd too. So, And Ladies of the Club is the only other one that I planned to read this summer, so I've got to make it work. And now I'm thinking technically this challenge ends on Labor Day. I don't think I'm going to make it with that book either. So maybe I'll sneak in some other 400-page book. We'll see how that goes. So my final thoughts for this month are, I don't know, but I have no regrets about how anything went. So I still enjoyed, pretty much all of the books that I read this month. I got about the same number of books that I would normally read in a month done. And I have to say the reading of the books was really weird. I hit a time warp at some point where I wasn't even sure, like, when I started reading some of these books, how far I had gotten, whether or not I had discussed them or not. The move really threw me off in terms of my weekly reading wrap-ups, and I'm just happy that I'm somewhat back on track. I am actually filming this book a week early, but I know the main book I plan on focusing on for the next week is And Ladies of the Club, and there's no way I'm finishing that before the end of June. So I figured I might as well record this early. So I did. And then finally, a quick update on what's going to be going on in July. So because I'm moving and I'm sort of sourcing my book from all sorts of strange places, I will not actually be doing a TBR specifically just for July. However, I will be continuing my series, which I'm calling No Books, No Shelves, No Problems. You can check out episode 1 of that. And during the month of July, I will be sourcing books from the library, both in physical form as well as audiobooks and ebooks and that kind of thing, and probably going to some little free libraries and maybe even a thrift store or two. So that is something to look forward to. So that's where all my hauls and TBRs will be coming from. I will obviously be continuing to work on my 2 currently readings, probably for the vast majority of July, if not all of July. And I'm very excited to say that I will be doing a read along for the Phantom Toll Booth. And I will include a link above and then in the description box below with the announcement video on that. It should be a lot of fun. I love the Phantom Toll Booth. I just read it, I think, last month, and it is the second book I have read the most of in my life. And yeah, I like it so much that it's only 2 months later and I'm ready to read it again. So hopefully you'll be able to join me for that. So that's it for today. That's everything that happened with me in June. What did you read this month? How did you like your books? Is there something that you read this month that you'd recommend? Let me know, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. And during the month of July, I will be sourcing books from the library. During the month of July, I will be sourcing books from the library and probably there's bug.